The entire city of New York feared him. Dominic Valentino, the most ruthless mafia boss on the East Coast. But there was one thing even he couldn't control. His little girl, born blind, born into darkness. Her mother died on the delivery table. Doctors said it was permanent. Specialists from around the world charged millions just to repeat the same words. There is no cure. And the mafia boss, a man who could bring an entire city to its knees, couldn't do anything to help his own daughter see the light. Until the day that girl showed up. She arrived with nothing but scars from her past, almost invisible in the lavish mansion. No one bothered to notice her until she recognized something no doctor, no nurse, no specialist had ever cared to see. It happened one afternoon, when the little girl reached for a doll and turned her head toward the light, too precisely, too accurately, as if she could see something. The maid froze. Her heart pounded. She knelt beside the child, gently lifted her tiny face toward the window, and what she saw made her gasp so loud the girl flinched. Because the little girl wasn't blind, not entirely. She had been forced into darkness by something far more shocking than a medical condition. And when the maid uncovered the truth, the mafia boss's entire world, his power, his enemies, the very people he trusted most, began to crumble. Stay with me until the end, because what the maid discovered inside that mansion will change everything you thought you knew about this family. Before we go any deeper into this story, if you find yourself growing curious about what is about to unfold, take a moment to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications so you will not miss a single tale we share on this channel, and a gentle like and share from you will help this story reach even more people. And now, I would love to know where you are listening from, so leave a comment with the name of your city or your country below, allowing me to see just how far our story has traveled across the world. And with that said, let us continue. But to understand Dominic Valentino, we must go back more than 30 years, back to the 10-year-old boy, standing in the corner of the living room, as he watched his father take 3 bullets to the chest. And the one who pulled the trigger was not an enemy, not a rival gang, but Victor Castellano, Dominic's own uncle, the older brother of his mother. That night, his father's blood soaked through the expensive Persian rug, and Dominic saw all of it through the narrow crack of the wardrobe door, where his mother had hidden him moments before the shots rang out, and he watched Victor step coldly over his brother-in-law's body, ransack the safe, and disappear into the night as if he had never been there. Dominic's father, Antonio Valentino, had once been the most powerful boss in the Northeast, a man who built an empire from nothing and turned the Valentino name into something the entire underworld bowed to. But he made one fatal mistake. He trusted Victor. He gave him control of finances and access to every secret the organization held, unaware that Victor had already forged alliances with rival families and promised them slices of Valentino territory if they helped him seize power. After his father's death, everything collapsed like a line of dominoes. Allies turned their backs. Loyal men were hunted down one by one. Assets were frozen. And Dominic's mother, Isabella, could not bear the fall. A woman once proud and adored by her husband, now reduced to a penniless widow cast out of the very home she once ruled by her own brother. 3 months after the funeral, she hanged herself in a rundown room on the outskirts of New York. And Dominic, 10 years old, found her body when he returned from school, and he stood there staring at her feet, swaying in the air as he made a vow. A vow to reclaim everything. A vow to make Victor pay. A vow to rebuild the Valentino Empire stronger and more merciless than it had ever been, and never again allow betrayal to touch him. The next 15 years were 15 years of blood and tears as Dominic started from nothing, working for small gangs, learning to hold a gun before he learned to shave, killing his first man at 16, a low-level mafioso who dared to insult his father in front of him. And he did not tremble. He did not regret. He only felt a cold emptiness spreading across his chest. And he understood he had become exactly what the world needed him to be. At 25, he had his own crew. At 28, he controlled 3 districts in New York, and by 32, he had become the most powerful boss on the East Coast, surpassing anything his father had ever achieved, building his empire on absolute ruthlessness, trusting no one, forgiving no one, allowing no weakness in himself. Victor Castellano was still alive, still running a small corner of the underworld in Chicago, and Dominic always knew, but he did not rush, because he wanted Victor to witness the Valentino Empire rise from ashes. He wanted Victor to live in fear, knowing death was coming, never knowing when, because the waiting is sometimes more brutal than death itself. And then, in the middle of that blood-soaked world, Dominic met Vanessa. Vanessa was the only light in the dark world Dominic inhabited, a woman who belonged to nothing connected to the underworld, a gentle and pure elementary school teacher in Brooklyn with a smile warm enough to melt ice. And they met by chance in a small coffee shop where Dominic was waiting for a secret exchange, when Vanessa spilled her coffee on his shirt and, instead of reacting with the fury he would have shown anyone else, he simply stood there, looking into her warm brown eyes, forgetting for the first time in 20 years who he was supposed to be. Vanessa never knew he was a mafia boss. She only saw a lonely man with sorrow buried deep in his gaze, and she sensed the wounded 10-year-old boy hiding inside him. And Dominic, a man who trusted no one, trusted her, loved her in a way he never believed himself capable of loving. Their marriage was the most carefully guarded secret of his life, because Dominic refused to let Vanessa be dragged into the danger that shaped his world. So he bought a small home in a quiet suburb where they could live like an ordinary married couple. And every night, no matter how busy he was or even if he had just ended a bloody purge, he returned to her, because in her arms he was not a feared crime lord but simply a man learning how to love again. When Vanessa told him she was pregnant, Dominic fell to his knees and cried, shedding the first tears he had released since the day his mother died, because now he would have a family, a child, a chance to give someone the very things life had stolen from him, love and safety, and a father who would always stay. The 9 months that followed were the happiest months of Dominic's life, and he hired a private doctor for Vanessa, personally chose every item for the nursery, even read books about fatherhood, something no one could ever imagine the most ruthless man on the East Coast doing. And they learned they were having a daughter whom they named Sophie, after Vanessa's grandmother. But fate never allowed Dominic happiness for long, and the birth came 3 weeks early when Vanessa went into labor in the middle of the night. And Dr. Richard Lawson, their private physician, arrived immediately as everything unfolded too fast. Vanessa's cries, the machines screaming, the doctor shouting for a nurse, and then the trembling sound of a newborn filling the room. Sophie arrived at 3 a.m, healthy and perfect, but Vanessa did not survive, hemorrhaging after birth as her blood poured faster than the doctor could stop it. And Dominic held her hand, watching the life fade from the warm brown eyes that had once saved him, and she managed to look at her daughter only once, smile weakly, whisper Sophie's name, and close her eyes forever. Dominic's scream that night was the scream of a wounded animal, for he had lost his father and he had lost his mother, and now he had lost the only woman who made him believe in love again. But he still had Sophie, the fragile child who was all Vanessa left him. 2 weeks after the funeral, while Dominic was still drowning in grief, Dr. Lawson delivered news even more devastating, explaining that Sophie did not respond to light, her eyes did not follow movement, and tests revealed her optic nerves had not developed properly, leaving her blind from birth with no cure possible. And Dominic heard those words as if a blade had been driven through his chest, realizing that his daughter, his only blood, the last tear Vanessa had given him, would never see light, would live forever in darkness. And the most powerful mafia boss in America collapsed onto the floor, holding his newborn daughter in his arms, and cried as he had never allowed himself to cry before. For the next 4 years, Dominic poured every resource he had into searching for a miracle for his daughter, and money was never the problem, for he could have bought an entire city if he wished, and he chartered private jets to fly Sophie to the finest hospitals in the world, from Switzerland with its leading ophthalmology centers, to Japan with its cutting-edge medical technology, to Germany, England, Israel, anywhere a renowned eye specialist could be found. And he spent millions of dollars on every journey, and hundreds of thousands more on each consultation, while the greatest experts in the world lined up to examine the daughter of a mafia kingpin, some drawn by the money and others driven by fear. Yet the result was always the same, a rehearsed look of regret and a slow shake of the head, as they explained with complicated medical terms. Dominic neither understood nor cared to understand that Sophie's optic nerves had simply never developed properly in the womb, and that there was no surgery, no medicine, no miracle capable of repairing what had never existed. Each refusal killed a part of him, for the man who could force anyone to do anything through wealth or threat was utterly powerless before the fate of his own child, a man capable of wiping out an entire mafia family in a single night, but unable to give his daughter the chance to see a sunrise. After 2 years of hopeless searching, Dominic accepted the brutal truth that Sophie would never see. Yet he vowed to give her the best life possible within that darkness. The mansion on Long Island was completely transformed, and Sophie's quarters became a world crafted entirely for a child who could not see, with thick, soft carpets covering the floors so she would not hurt herself if she stumbled, every sharp edge rounded, walls coated in different textures so she could navigate by touch, and toys designed to make sounds or carry distinctive surfaces. Dominic hired a full team of specialists to teach Sophie how to live without sight. But the greatest change occurred within Dominic himself. The Mafia lord who once treated time as money and thought nothing of killing a man for delaying a meeting, now spending hours every day beside his daughter, reading stories to her each night, describing in words the things she could never see, telling her about the blue of the sky, the way sunlight dances across water, the gentle face of her mother in their wedding photograph. And he learned to cook so he could prepare her breakfast with his own hands, astonishing his private chef who nearly fainted at the sight. And he carried Sophie through the garden each afternoon so she could feel the wind, smell the flowers, and hear the birds singing, becoming her eyes through his voice and his tenderness. His business slid to second place as he moved most operations into the mansion, and refused meetings that would take him too far from Sophie, prompting other bosses to whisper that Dominic had grown weak, that loving a blind daughter had dulled his edge, though none dared say it to his face because, no matter how deeply he loved Sophie, Dominic was still Dominic, and he could still cut out the tongue of any man foolish enough to insult his child. Dr. Lawson became the person Dominic trusted most with Sophie's care, visiting weekly, prescribing vitamins and minerals, monitoring her development, and Dominic never questioned the doctor who had been with his family for 15 years, never knowing that every pill Lawson gave Sophie was not meant to heal her but to preserve a darkness she did not need to live with. And 4 years passed in that fragile illusion of peace, until the day a young woman named Olivia Hayes walked through the gates of the Valentino estate. Olivia Hayes was not born to be loved. She was born to endure. And fate had decided that for her on the night she was 6 years old, the night she lay asleep in the small second-floor bedroom of her home on the outskirts of Chicago, dreaming of her mother's lullaby, a voice sweet as honey, until she was awakened by screaming, her father calling her name, her mother crying, and the roar of fire devouring everything like a living beast. When Olivia opened her eyes, the room was already filled with black smoke, and flames crawled along the hallway blocking the way to her parents' room, and she called for her mother but her voice disappeared beneath the sound of burning wood. Someone smashed her window, a neighbor, who pulled her out and tossed her onto the safety tarp below, and though she landed unharmed, she could only look up and watch her house become a giant ball of fire while her parents never made it out. They were found in the bedroom holding each other, already gone from the smoke long before the flames reached them, and Olivia stood on the lawn staring at the collapsing house without shedding a tear, too shocked for tears, her empty eyes fixed on the world burning to ash around her. There were no relatives to take her in, for her parents were immigrants with no family in America, and she was placed in Street Mary's orphanage, a worn-down institution on a lonely stretch of suburban land where unwanted children were dropped off and forgotten. Martha Coldwell ran the place, and her name said everything: cold, cruel, and devoid of compassion. A woman who saw the orphans as burdens, mouths she was forced to feed with government funding that mostly disappeared into her own pockets, leaving the children with scraps for meals, moldy beds, and clothes so worn they barely held together. Olivia learned her first lesson at Street Mary on the third day when she cried because she missed her mother, and Mrs. Coldwell heard her, dragged her into a private room, and beat her with a wooden ruler until bruises bloomed across her back, telling her that tears were a luxury orphans did not get to have, that crying was weakness, and weakness was a sin. And from that moment Olivia never cried again, at least not where anyone could see. 12 years in the orphanage were 12 years of living hell, and Olivia learned to become invisible, speaking little, drawing no attention, forming no friendships because friends were vulnerabilities and could be used against you, something she had watched happen to other children whenever Mrs. Coldwell chose to punish an entire group for the mistake of one. The only way to survive was to have no one to lose, so she completed every chore without complaint, scrubbing floors, washing clothes, cooking meals for the entire orphanage from the time she was 10, enduring beatings for mistakes that were not hers because Mrs. Coldwell always needed someone to unleash her rage upon, and Olivia was the easiest target, the orphan girl with no one to protect her, no one to ask after her, no one who would notice if she vanished. Yet within that hell, Olivia found one thing worth holding on to: a little girl named Lily, brought to Street Mary when Olivia was 10, a 4-year-old left at the gate during a stormy night, a child with no known parents and no one who cared, except Olivia, who looked into Lily's wide, frightened eyes and saw herself 4 years earlier and vowed to protect this child at any cost. She took Lily as her sister, shared her meager meals, held her through the night so she would not fear the dark, stepped between her and every punishment Mrs. Coldwell tried to inflict, making Lily the one reason Olivia kept breathing, for without Lily she might have given up long ago. When Olivia turned 18, she was finally allowed to leave. But Lily, only 12 then, was forced to stay 6 more years, and Olivia promised she would come back, that she would earn money, hire a lawyer, do whatever it took to bring her sister out of that place. She walked out of street, Mary's with empty hands, a heart full of scars, and a sacred promise to the little girl she loved, unaware that the world outside was even more merciless than anything she had survived. The world outside the orphanage did not welcome Olivia with open arms. It greeted her instead with the cold indifference of a society that had no place for an orphan with no degree, no experience, and no one to vouch for her. So she rented a cheap room in a Chicago slum, a space no larger than a typical bathroom with damp walls, windows that would not close, and winter air that cut to the bone. Yet it was hers, the first place in her life that belonged to her alone. She worked every job she could find, washing dishes in a restaurant in the morning, cleaning hotel rooms in the afternoon, serving drinks at a bar at night, sleeping 4 hours a day, eating one meal, saving every coin to send to Lily and to build toward her dream of becoming a nurse, enrolling in a community college program and attending classes on her rare days off, enduring every hardship without complaint because she had survived 12 years in Street Mary's and believed she could survive anything. Then Derek appeared. Derek Matthews, 27 years old, manager of a convenience store near one of Olivia's jobs. A man with a warm smile, a gentle voice, and eyes that knew how to make a girl feel special. And he bought her coffee every morning, asked about her after long shifts, listened when she spoke of Lily and her dream of nursing and the life she was fighting to build, telling her she deserved happiness. And for the first time in her life, someone told Olivia she was worthy of love. She had never known love, had been raised without parents, without guidance, without anyone to teach her the difference between real affection and sweet lies. So when Derek proposed after 6 months, she agreed, believing fate had finally chosen to be kind, imagining a family, a loving husband, a normal life she had never dared to hope for. She was wrong, fatally wrong, for Derek's true nature surfaced immediately after the wedding, disappearing on their wedding night until 3 a.m, returning drunk and penniless, gambling away every paycheck, then stealing her savings, the money she had set aside for nursing school, the money she sent to Lily, all of it gone to his late-night wagers, and when she confronted him, he hit her. The first slap came in the 2nd month of marriage, shocking Olivia into stillness, for although she had endured beatings from Mrs. Coldwell for more than a decade, she had never imagined her husband would strike her. Yet Derek cried afterward, begged her forgiveness, promised it would never happen again, and Olivia believed him because she had no one else, nowhere to go. And some fragile part of her still longed so desperately to be loved that she accepted the bruises as the price. But the slaps became punches. The punches became full beatings. Derek hitting her whenever he lost money, whenever he drank, whenever life felt unfair, turning her into the punching bag for all his rage, forcing her to quit night shifts so she could stay home to serve him, cutting off her schooling, taking her phone to isolate her from Lily, trapping her inside a marriage that had become a prison. Then Olivia learned she was pregnant, 24 years old, carrying her first child, and as she watched the 2 lines appear on the test, she felt hope for the first time in years, imagining a baby who would love her unconditionally, someone she could protect and cherish the way she had protected Lily. And she hid the pregnancy from Derek while quietly planning her escape, intending to leave when she reached 3 months, when it would be safer for the baby, imagining a fresh start in New York where no one knew her. But Derek found out by reading the message she sent to the clinic, and he snapped, coming home drunk and furious, screaming that she had deceived him, that she planned to run, calling her a traitor, and then he beat her, not with the usual punches but with kicks to her stomach. Once, then again, while Olivia curled on the floor with her arms around her belly trying to shield the child that had barely begun to exist. She could not protect it. Blood pooled everywhere. Neighbors rushed her to the hospital in critical condition. And though the doctors saved Olivia, they could not save the baby, the child lost at barely 3 months, a life that had no chance to be named or to cry or to see the world. And Olivia lay on the hospital bed, staring up at the white ceiling, feeling that a part of her had died with the child she never got to meet. After leaving the hospital, Olivia filed for divorce, because she had nothing left to lose. The child was gone, love was dead, and the fear she once had of Derek had dissolved into a hollow emptiness that words could not hold. And Derek did not protest, signing the papers with the indifferent expression of a man discarding something old he no longer wanted. She walked out of the apartment with a small bag of clothes, believing the nightmare had finally ended. But she was wrong, terribly wrong, Because 3 months after the divorce, Derek died, not by accident, not by illness, but by 2 bullets to the head in a dark Chicago alley, and police ruled it a gambling hit, for Derek had borrowed money from loan sharks tied to the Mafia, using it to gamble again, and when he could not repay, he paid with his life. But his death did not free Olivia. It dragged her deeper into the abyss, because the loan sharks came for her, claiming Derek had borrowed money under her name, waiving documents forged with her stolen signature, debts totaling $200,000, an amount she could never repay no matter how long she worked. They offered 2 choices: pay the money or pay another way, and Olivia did not dare imagine what the other way meant. She fled Chicago that same night, slipping into New York, hoping to disappear in the most crowded city in America, changing her phone number, moving constantly, taking cash-only jobs to avoid leaving a trace, yet they still found her, appearing at workplaces to threaten her employers until she was fired, pounding on her doors at night, shouting vile threats that kept her awake in terror, never knowing when they would grow impatient and do to her what they had done to Derek. Then Lily called, her little sister, now 22, free from the orphanage and working in a small shop in Boston, her voice trembling as she said she had blood cancer, the doctors calling it late stage, warning she would die within 6 months without treatment, and the cost of treatment was $400,000, not including medication, hospital stay, or post-chemotherapy care. Olivia listened and laughed, not with joy but with the brittle sound of someone pushed beyond all human limits, because she owed $200,000 and Lily needed $400,000 more, a total of $600,000, while Olivia could not even pay rent for the month. That night she stood on the Brooklyn Bridge in freezing rain, staring at the dark water below, the waves tapping against the pillars as if calling her name, and she thought of her parents who died in the fire, of the child she never met, of Lily waiting in a hospital bed for a miracle that would never come. She had fought for 28 years, 28 years of enduring, surviving, refusing to break, and for what, she thought? For this emptiness, this endless suffering, no money, no home, no future, only debt and death closing in on every side. Maybe letting go would be easier. Maybe the cold water below would bring her the peace she had never known. And she closed her eyes, gripping the railing, preparing to climb. Then her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number, and she almost ignored it until the words on the screen stopped her. A maid position, private estate on Long Island, salary $20,000 a month, room and board included, immediate start, no background checks, no questions about the past, and if interested, come to the listed address at 8 in the morning. Olivia read the message again and again. $20,000 a month, 10 times anything she had ever earned, enough to repay her debt in a year, enough to save Lily. It could be a scam, she thought, a trafficking trap, something even worse. But what did she have left to lose? Death waited for her on the bridge or in the hands of the loan sharks, and at least this message offered a sliver of hope. Olivia stepped down from the railing and looked at the black water one last time before turning away into the rain, deciding she would go to that address in the morning to see how far fate intended to toy with her life, unaware that the address would lead her to the mansion of the most feared mafia boss on the east coast of America, and even more unaware that this choice would alter her life, the life of a 4-year-old girl, and the entire empire of Dominic Valentino forever. The next morning, Olivia stood before the gates of the Valentino estate and felt as if she were stepping into another world. The iron gates towering more than 3 meters high and curling into intricate patterns, with a massive gold-plated letter V gleaming in the sunlight, and beyond it a long stone path stretched ahead, flanked by perfectly trimmed trees leading to a mansion so grand it resembled the palaces she had only seen through the windows of electronic stores. Security cameras were mounted everywhere, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes, and guards in black suits stood at attention, with faces carved from ice and weapons undoubtedly hidden beneath their jackets. Olivia swallowed hard and stepped through the gate with her heart pounding in her chest. A woman awaited her in the foyer, around 50 years old, with silver hair twisted into a tight bun, her face rigid and emotionless, her sharp gaze sweeping over Olivia as though inspecting merchandise. Margaret Thornton, the head housekeeper. She did not shake hands, did not smile, did not offer polite greetings. She merely stated flatly that Olivia was hired and would begin immediately. No interview, no questions about experience. Something that should have alarmed Olivia, but she was far too desperate to object. Margaret led her through the mansion while reciting the rules in a monotone voice like a machine. No asking personal questions about the family, no wandering outside assigned areas, No speaking to the master unless spoken to. No looking directly into his eyes for too long. No entering young Mistress Sophie's room without permission from Margaret or Dr. Lawson. No questioning the child's medication or treatment. And breaking any rule meant immediate dismissal, with the word immediate delivered with such icy emphasis that Olivia understood being fired might not be the worst outcome. Olivia's room was on the lower floor reserved for staff, small but clean, with a bed, a wardrobe, and a private bathroom. A paradise compared to anywhere she had ever lived. Margaret handed her a uniform, a long black dress with a white apron, then left without another word. Olivia changed, stared at herself in the mirror, and wondered what kind of place she had stepped into. That afternoon she was assigned to clean the second-floor hallway, working in silence and trying to make herself invisible the way she had learned in the orphanage, never drawing attention, never giving anyone a reason to notice her existence. Then she heard footsteps, heavy and deliberate, each step claiming the floor itself, and when she lifted her head, her heart seemed to stop. Dominic Valentino was walking toward her, towering almost 2 heads above her, his broad shoulders and sculpted frame contained within a charcoal gray suit cut with meticulous precision, his face chiseled like stone with sharp angles, a strong jaw, and a straight, severe nose. His jet-black hair was slicked back, revealing a wide forehead and thick brows, but it was his eyes that froze her, 2 black depths without bottom, cold and piercing as though they could cut straight into a person's soul. Olivia immediately lowered her gaze, remembering Margaret's warning not to look the master in the eye, while her heart thundered and her fingers tightened around the mop handle until her knuckles blanched. Dominic walked past her without stopping, without even glancing her way, as though she were nothing more than a piece of furniture in the corridor. But as he passed, she felt something. A sudden chill, a force that pressed against the air, a primal danger that made every survival instinct in her body flare in warning that this man could kill her without a flicker of hesitation. And she was right. Yet she had no way of knowing that this very dangerous man would become her salvation, or that she would become the one to save his little girl. The first days inside the Valentino estate passed like a strange dream for Olivia, waking at 5 in the morning, slipping into her uniform, and beginning her duties before the entire household stirred, cleaning the common areas, doing laundry, changing linens, and completing any task Margaret assigned, working from morning until night with feet aching to numbness and hands roughened by cleaning chemicals, yet never complaining because each day meant another day earning money, each paycheck another step toward saving Lily. Margaret watched her like a hawk stalking prey, appearing in the most unexpected corners, her sharp eyes sweeping over every surface. Olivia had just cleaned, her fingers gliding across tables searching for dust, her mouth always ready to release a cutting remark. And Olivia could not understand why Margaret seemed to despise her, for she had done nothing wrong, followed every rule, yet the head housekeeper's gaze always held a wary edge, as though Olivia were a threat requiring strict surveillance. The only person who treated her with kindness was Elena, the mansion's head chef, an Italian woman of about 55, with a round figure and a smile, warm as spring sunlight, who had served the Valentino family for more than 20 years. Since Dominic's father was alive, and Elena would save extra portions for Olivia late at night, offer her the best food, and occasionally whisper stories about life inside the estate. It was Elena who first mentioned Sophie, calling her a poor little thing, a 4-year-old who had never seen the sun, born blind with a mother who died at childbirth. And Elena murmured that the master loved the child more than his own life, and that Sophie was the reason he had changed, because before her Dominic Valentino had been a heartless demon, and now he was still a demon but one with a weakness. Olivia began to watch Sophie from afar, never allowed into the child's room, but sometimes seeing her through the doorway while cleaning the halls, a tiny girl with her father's dark hair and porcelain-white skin, her large round eyes unfocused and empty, drifting through nothingness, moving slowly with one hand tracing the wall to guide her steps, each movement cautious as though afraid to fall. What struck Olivia most was how unlike other 4-year-olds Sophie seemed, rarely smiling, rarely crying, rarely speaking, living in her own quiet world apart from everything around her, her gaze dreamlike and vacant as if not fully present. Olivia assumed it was due to blindness. She knew nothing about visually impaired children, so she never questioned it. Once a week Dr. Richard Lawson visited the estate to examine Sophie, a tall, slender man around 55 with salt and pepper hair, gold-rimmed glasses, and a smile permanently fixed on his face that never once reached his eyes, arriving with a black leather case, entering Sophie's room for about an hour, then speaking privately with Dominic or Margaret. Olivia noticed something odd. Whenever Dr. Lawson came, Margaret grew tense, preparing the child's room herself, chasing all staff away, guarding the door until the doctor finished, allowing no one nearby and no one to overhear. Olivia also noticed the medicine bottles. Sophie took medication 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night, and Margaret alone was permitted to prepare the doses, doing so behind closed doors where no one could see, then handing them to the nurse by her own hand, a ritual repeated with unwavering precision. Olivia did not dwell on any of it. She was too consumed by her work, by worry for Lily, by the monthly payments she scraped together to send home, with no time to wonder about mysterious medicines or Margaret's tight-lipped tension. But fate had already chosen its path, and within a few weeks Olivia would witness something she was never meant to see, and from that moment forward, her life would never be the same again. It happened on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after Olivia began working at the estate, while she was cleaning the second-floor hallway near the small office Dr. Lawson used whenever he came to examine Sophie, and she had not meant to eavesdrop, only happened to pass by as the door was not fully closed, and the voices inside drifted out. Dr. Lawson's voice was low and tense as he said the current dosage was no longer as effective, that the child was growing and needed more, that he would adjust the formula, and Margaret's reply was a whisper sharp enough for Olivia to hear as she asked how much to increase, and whether the master would suspect anything. And Dr. Lawson gave a soft, humorless laugh, and said Dominic trusted him completely, 15 years of unquestioned authority, that the man never challenged what he prescribed, and she should simply continue as usual and allow no one else to touch the medicine. Olivia stood frozen, her hand tightening around the mop handle, her heart racing for reasons she could not understand, sensing something deeply wrong in that hushed exchange, wondering why they whispered, why Margaret asked whether the master would be suspicious. Suspicious of what? Footsteps approached the door and Olivia panicked, quickly moving to another section of the hall and pretending to clean the window, and Dr. Lawson stepped out, his gaze sweeping across the corridor, pausing a moment when he saw her before offering a small nod and heading down the stairs, followed by Margaret, whose sharp eyes bored into Olivia as if trying to read how much she had heard, and Olivia lowered her head, scrubbing the window while struggling to keep her hands steady, feeling the weight of those eyes lingering long after the woman walked away. That night Olivia could not sleep, staring at the dark ceiling as questions churned in her mind. What kind of medicine required increasing dosages? Why the secrecy from the master? Why Margaret alone was allowed to prepare Sophie's medication? She recalled what Elena had told her, that Sophie had been born blind, and that doctors around the world said there was no cure. So what were these medicines supposed to do? Vitamins? Supplements? Developmental aids? And why, if so harmless, were they treated like dangerous secrets? From that night on, Olivia began to notice more, not because she intended to investigate, but because 28 years of surviving hardship had sharpened her instincts for danger, and she noticed how Margaret prepared the medicine only behind the closed door of her private room, how the bottles in the medical cabinet bore no labels, no instructions, only numbers and symbols she did not recognize, how Sophie reacted after each dose, becoming more lethargic after about 30 minutes, her eyes duller, her movements slower, sleeping an abnormal amount, sometimes 14 to 16 hours a day, and even when awake she drifted through the world as if through fog, not fully conscious, not fully aware. Olivia had studied 2 years in a nursing program before Derek forced her to quit, not much but enough to know no vitamin or supplement caused a child to sleep 16 hours a day, or left a 4-year-old trapped in a half-dreaming state. Yet she dared not say anything. She was a nameless maid with no degree, no authority, no one to defend her, and asking questions would get her fired or worse, would make her disappear like the maids Elena whispered about. The ones who asked too many questions, the ones who did not know how to keep quiet, the ones who suddenly vanished and were never spoken of again. Olivia knew she should stay silent, focus on earning money, saving Lily, and leaving this place as soon as possible. Yet each time she saw Sophie, the little girl with the hollow eyes and the smile that never came, she felt a sharp ache in her chest, seeing her own childhood reflected in the child. Another soul trapped in darkness, with no one to protect her, and no one willing to see the truth, and the questions in Olivia's mind grew louder, like embers waiting for the moment they would ignite. 2 weeks after the secret conversation Olivia had accidentally overheard, something no one could have predicted happened. Margaret Thornton fell ill, the iron-willed housekeeper who had not missed a single day in 10 years of service, suddenly burning with a fever of 40 degrees and confined to bed. A doctor was summoned and diagnosed acute pneumonia, insisting she needed complete rest for at least a week, and the news rippled through the estate like an earthquake because without Margaret nothing functioned correctly. The household slipped into disarray, and most crucial of all, no one knew how to prepare Sophie's medicine. Margaret alone held that secret, the key to the locked medical cabinet, the formula, the trust of Dr. Lawson, and now she lay unconscious, unable to speak or instruct anyone. Dr. Lawson was called in that night. He mixed a single evening dose for Sophie and told the nurse he would return in the morning to prepare the rest. But the next morning he did not come. He was trapped in an emergency surgery at the hospital and phoned to say he would arrive by noon, then called again to say he would be delayed further, leaving Sophie's morning medication postponed 1 hour, 2 hours, 3, 4, until half the day had passed without her receiving any dose. Olivia was assigned to clean the area near Sophie's room that afternoon, pushing her cart down the hall with no expectation of anything unusual, when she heard something that made her stop. Laughter. The bright, pure laughter of a child. Olivia had never heard Sophie laugh. In nearly 2 months she had seen the little girl only silent, sluggish, drifting as though living in another realm. Yet now laughter rang out behind the door, joyful and alive like any 4-year-old's. The door was slightly ajar. Unable to resist, Olivia looked through the gap, and what she saw froze the blood in her veins. Sophie sat on the floor playing with a doll, nothing unusual there. But the way she played was entirely different. She reached for a doll lying nearly a meter away, reaching in the correct direction and at the correct distance as if she could see it. Olivia held her breath, watching Sophie move without feeling along the wall, walking straight to the toy basket without hesitation or stumbling, picking up a red ball and throwing it toward the window, her eyes following the ball's arc through the air. Following it, Olivia's knees weakened so sharply she had to brace herself against the wall, her heart pounding violently, terrified someone might hear it. She was no doctor, but she knew. A blind child did not track objects with her eyes, did not reach accurately toward things she could not see, did not move with such confident spatial awareness. Impossible. Then the impossible happened. A beam of late afternoon sunlight slipped through the curtain and struck Sophie's face. The child squinted, lifted a hand to shield her eyes, and turned her head away from the brightness. Olivia wanted to scream, but no sound came. Every nursing student learned in the first year that a blind child with undeveloped optic nerves could not react to light. And yet Sophie, the supposedly blind child diagnosed at birth, the child declared incurable by specialists around the world, had just flinched from sunlight. Footsteps echoed at the far end of the corridor, and Olivia hurried away from the doorway, pushing her cart as if nothing had happened, but her mind was collapsing and reforming all at once as pieces of a terrible puzzle clicked into place. The quiet conversation about dosages, the secret medicine, Margaret being the only one allowed to prepare it, Sophie's perpetual lethargy after every dose, and today, after 4 hours without medication, Sophie suddenly alive, responsive, moving like a child who could see. Olivia stumbled back to her room, shut the door, leaned against it with shaking hands, trying to steady her breath while one question screamed through her mind. Sophie was not blind. So who made her blind, and why? That night Olivia did not sleep, lying in bed with her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling while her mind replayed the image of Sophie squinting against the sunlight, and she tried to convince herself she had imagined it, that the twilight had deceived her vision, that stress had made her see what was not there. But she knew she had not been mistaken, because 2 years of nursing school had taught her how to observe, and what she saw that afternoon had been real. Sophie had reacted to light, had tracked an object with her eyes, and the child was not blind, at least not in the way everyone believed. The next morning Olivia worked as usual, though her thoughts spun constantly. She needed proof. She needed to know what medicine Sophie had been taking. She needed to understand what was truly happening inside this estate. Margaret was still bedridden, but Dr. Lawson had come the previous evening to prepare Sophie's medication, and now Sophie had returned to her familiar lethargic state, her eyes vacant, her movements slow, the contrast between yesterday's lively child and today's muted one shattering any remaining doubt in Olivia's mind. The opportunity came that afternoon, when Olivia was assigned to clean the small medical room on the first floor, a place usually kept locked but left open today for her to tidy. The medicine cabinet was still locked, yet several bottles stood on the desk, left behind by Dr. Lawson after preparing Sophie's dose the night before, and Olivia glanced around, seeing no one, her heartbeat tightening in her chest as she recognized the danger of what she was about to do. If caught, she would be fired instantly or worse, but the memory of Sophie's bright laughter, the way the little girl had come alive, pushed her beyond hesitation. She took the old phone from her apron pocket, raised it, and snapped photos of the labels on the bottles 1, 2, 3, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. Then she quickly tucked it away and resumed wiping the desk just as another maid passed by the door. That night, when the mansion had gone silent, Olivia sat in her room with her phone, enlarging the photos and writing down the medication names, then connected to the weak staff Wi-Fi and searched them. The results struck her like a blow to the chest. The first bottle was an extremely potent sedative typically used to treat schizophrenia and severe psychiatric disorders in adults, not recommended for children under 12, with side effects including prolonged drowsiness, diminished focus, slowed reactions, and at high doses, impaired vision. The second bottle was a central nervous system depressant also intended for adults, known to dull cognition and reflexes. The third was an anticonvulsant, but the dosage written was 3 times higher than what would ever be given to a child. Olivia stared at the screen, nausea rising in her throat. This was not vitamin supplementation, not developmental support, but a cocktail of drugs strong enough to keep a 4-year-old suspended in a half-conscious haze for 4 years. Sophie had not been blind at birth. Sophie had been forced into blindness, unable to see clearly, unable to respond normally, unable to live as a healthy child, and when the medication was delayed by 4 hours, the effects had weakened, allowing Sophie to awaken, to see, to laugh, to live. Olivia pressed her face into her hands, her body trembling. She wanted to cry, but no tears came. Wanted to scream but did not dare. Someone had done this. Someone had deliberately turned a normal child into a blind one for 4 years. Dr. Lawson, Margaret, perhaps others. And the question that burned in her mind was why? What motive could justify crippling the daughter of the most powerful mafia boss on the East Coast? Olivia knew she needed more information, needed stronger proof, needed to uncover the entire truth before deciding what to do next. Yet she also understood that every step deeper into this secret pushed her closer to danger, because anyone cruel enough to do this to a child would not hesitate to do worse to anyone who threatened to expose them. But Olivia had already made her choice. She could not turn back, not after what she had seen, not while Sophie remained imprisoned in an artificial darkness inside her own home. 3 nights after discovering the truth about Sophie's medication, Olivia decided to act, knowing she needed undeniable proof, the kind that could not be dismissed or explained away, and she knew she needed the original medical records, the documents that would reveal whether the child had ever truly been diagnosed as blind at birth. Margaret had recovered and returned to work, though weakened enough to retire early to her room each evening, and Dr. Lawson only came once a week and never stayed overnight, making this the safest window Olivia would ever have. At 2 in the morning, the mansion lay silent and submerged in darkness, and Olivia slipped from her room barefoot, moving without a sound. Having spent 3 days memorizing the guards' patrol schedule, knowing the precise moment when the second-floor hallway would be empty, knowing exactly where Dr. Lawson's office was and what kind of lock secured its door. The key, she had learned, was kept in the pocket of Margaret's coat, and that afternoon, when Margaret left her coat draped over a chair to step into the restroom, Olivia had taken the key, pressed it into a soft bar of soap hidden in her apron to create a mold, then replaced the key before Margaret returned, a technique she had learned from a girl in the orphanage who later got arrested for theft, never imagining it would one day save a child's life. Using that soap mold, Olivia fashioned a crude replica from a strip of metal she found in the supply room, imperfect, but good enough for an old lock, and when the door clicked open, she slipped inside, closing it behind her and switching on her phone's flashlight because she dared not risk the overhead lights. The room was small and orderly, with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a bookshelf, and she moved straight to the cabinet, opening drawer after drawer, flipping through folders of names she did not recognize until she found it. A thick file labeled Sophie Valentino. She pulled it out, set it on the desk, and began reading. Most of the documents were monthly evaluation reports written by Dr. Lawson, each one concluding that the congenital blindness remained unchanged, that there was no improvement in visual response. But tucked into the back, as though forgotten, was a single sheet of aged paper. Olivia lifted it, read it, and felt her heart stop. It was Sophie's newborn examination report from New York Presbyterian Hospital, written not by Dr. Lawson but by a pediatrician named Dr. Amanda Chen, dated 2 days after Sophie's birth, before the child was brought home, and the findings were so shocking that Olivia had to reread them 3 times to be sure her eyes were not deceiving her. Normal pupil reflex, normal reaction to light, normal ability to track movement, No abnormalities detected, and the conclusion clear and undeniable: newborn vision within normal limits. Sophie had not been born blind. Her eyesight had been completely normal. So what had happened in the 2 weeks between that report and the moment Dr. Lawson informed Dominic that his daughter was blind? Olivia photographed the report, her hands shaking so badly she needed 3 attempts to capture a clear image, and she was just about to return the file to its drawer when she heard footsteps in the hallway, growing closer. She shut off the flashlight, shoved the phone into her pocket, and scanned frantically for a hiding place. There was none but the narrow space beneath the desk, and she crawled under it, curling into the smallest shape she could manage, willing herself not to breathe. The door opened. Light flooded the room. Footsteps entered. Olivia recognized the polished black shoes and the hem of the familiar dress. Margaret. The housekeeper walked to the filing cabinet, opened the top drawer, removed something Olivia could not see, and Olivia lowered her head, silently praying. A minute passed like a century before the light clicked off again. The door closed, and the footsteps faded down the hall. Olivia stayed hidden for 5 more agonizing minutes before crawling out, checking to ensure Sophie's file was back exactly where it belonged, then slipping out of the office like a shadow. When she finally reached her room, she locked the door, leaned against it, and let angry tears run down her cheeks. She now had proof. Sophie had been born with normal vision. Dr. Lawson had lied, and for 4 long years an innocent child had been drugged into artificial darkness. The only question now was what Olivia would do with the truth. In the days that followed the night she broke into Dr. Lawson's office, Olivia lived in a constant state of tension, carrying a terrible secret she had no one to confide in. Unable to tell Elena for fear of involving her, unable to go to the police because this was the mansion of a mafia kingpin, and the police themselves might well be in his pocket, and most certainly unable to tell Dominic, a man who could kill her for merely suspecting she knew too much. What Olivia did not know was that Dominic had already begun to notice her long before she realized it. The mafia boss had eyes trained to detect every irregularity, and the new maid was unlike the others. She did not shrink in fear the way they did not scramble out of his path, and her eyes, though she always tried to avoid looking directly at him, held something he recognized. A kind of pain, a strength forged in suffering, an expression he had seen reflected in his own mirror for more than 20 years. Dominic began to observe the small things about Olivia, how she worked harder than anyone without ever complaining, never resting until her tasks were complete, how she kept her distance, yet remained polite, never gossiping, never prying into matters that were not hers, and how she looked at Sophie with a different gaze, not pity, not fear, but something deeper, as though she saw something in the child no one else could see. One night around 10, Dominic walked through the garden to clear his mind after a day spent dealing with enemies pressing for pieces of his territory. He often did this when he needed to think, when he needed quiet away from walls and noise, and that night he heard crying stifled, trembling, the kind of crying someone tries desperately to hide. He followed the sound and found Olivia curled on a stone bench behind a rose bush, clutching her phone, tears streaking down her cheeks as she spoke to someone on the other end. "Hold on. Lily, I'll get the money. I promise. You have to live. You're all I have left. I can't lose you." Dominic stood in the shadows listening, hearing her speak of hospital bills, chemotherapy, impossible numbers she was trying to gather, hearing the fierce love in her voice, the exhaustion, the desperation, but also the unyielding determination of someone who had nothing left, yet refused to surrender. When the call ended, Olivia folded into herself and cried aloud, unaware that the most feared mafia boss on the East Coast was standing less than 10 steps away, watching her release years of pain. Dominic did not know what made him step out of the darkness. Perhaps the sound of her grief reminded him of nights he cried alone after his mother died. Perhaps it was because, for the first time in years, he saw someone suffering not out of greed or hatred but out of love. He approached, and Olivia lifted her head, face streaked with tears, eyes widening in fear as she shot to her feet, wiping her cheeks, stumbling through apologizing for being in the garden, for crying, for anything he might deem wrong. Dominic said nothing, simply looked at her with those deep, unreadable black eyes, then asked in a low, unexpectedly gentle voice, "What illness does your sister have?" Olivia was so stunned she forgot to fear him and looked into his eyes for the first time and saw something she never expected. Not iciness, not menace, but understanding. She told him about Lily, about the blood cancer, about the crushing medical costs, about her desperate efforts to save her sister, and she did not know why she told him. Perhaps she was too tired to carry everything alone. Perhaps because, in that brief moment, his eyes did not look like the eyes of a killer. Dominic listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he merely nodded once and walked away without another word. Olivia remained standing there, unsure what to feel, wondering whether she had just made the greatest mistake of her life by revealing so much to a mafia boss. But the next morning, when she returned to her room after her shift, she found a white envelope on her pillow, thick with cash, and she counted it 3 times because she could not believe her eyes. $50,000. With no letter, no explanation, only a small scrap of paper bearing a single handwritten line, "For your sister." Olivia pressed the envelope to her chest and cried, but these tears were different. For the first time in 28 years, someone had helped her without asking for anything in return. In the days after receiving the envelope of money, Olivia lived in an indescribable tug-of-war, sending the funds to Lily at once, allowing her sister to be transferred to a better hospital, and to begin a new round of chemotherapy with a higher chance of survival. And for the first time in months, Lily's voice carried a faint thread of vitality instead of exhaustion, a change that made Olivia want to weep with joy each time she thought of it. Yet she could not stop thinking about the man who had given her that money, Dominic Valentino, the Mafia kingpin, the killer, a man she knew by reputation and through the hushed, chilling stories Elena had whispered about those who betrayed him, about bodies that were never found, about families that vanished in a single night, a monster she should avoid at all costs. And yet that monster had saved her sister. That demon had watched her cry in the dark and, instead of dismissing her, had listened, had given her $50,000 without asking for anything in return, without conditions, without chains, only 2 simple words scribbled as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "For your sister." And because of that she began to see Dominic differently, not forgetting who he was or what he had done, but glimpsing other fragments of the man within, watching him hold Sophie each morning before leaving for work with a tenderness that suggested she was the most precious thing he had ever touched, hearing him read stories to his daughter every night, shifting his voice for each character to make her laugh, noticing how those black, cold, terrifying eyes softened into something almost fragile when he looked at the child he adored, realizing that Dominic Valentino was a criminal but also a father, a murderer who nonetheless loved deeply, a ruthless mafia boss who had saved Lily without asking Olivia to give anything of herself. Could a human being be both demon and angel at the same time? Olivia did not know. She only knew she could no longer look at Dominic in a simple, one-dimensional way, and while she wrestled with this quiet inner conflict, something else was happening too. For Sophie had begun to gravitate toward her, though no one could pinpoint exactly when it started. Perhaps the evening Olivia had hummed softly while cleaning the hallway near Sophie's room, and the little girl had stood behind the door listening for 10 minutes. Perhaps the moment Olivia picked up the doll Sophie had dropped and the child reached for her hand instead of the nurse's. Perhaps the night Olivia told her stories about the stars when she could not sleep, unaware that Dominic was standing on the other side of the door listening to every word. Sophie began asking for Olivia, wanting her to guide her through the garden, wanting her to sing, wanting her to sit beside her at meals. Margaret was displeased, watching Olivia with increasing suspicion, as if she were a threat that needed to be removed. But Dominic did not intervene, for he saw the way Sophie smiled when Olivia was near, a rare thing for the child who had withdrawn so far into herself, and he allowed it to continue. Olivia held Sophie each time the little girl sought her, and her heart ached because she knew the truth, knew Sophie was not blind, knew the child was being drugged into darkness by the very people meant to protect her, and knew she had to do something to save her even if it meant risking her own life. But she could not act too soon. She needed the right moment, needed to be certain that when she revealed the truth Dominic would believe her instead of killing her, and she needed Sophie clear-headed long enough to prove she could see. That moment was coming. Olivia just did not know how soon it would arrive. The opportunity arrived on a Monday morning, when Margaret received news that her mother had died back home in Pennsylvania, and the iron-fisted housekeeper who had never once betrayed emotion broke down crying in the middle of the dining room as she read the message, then begged Dominic for permission to return for the funeral for at least 5 days, a request he granted without hesitation because, although she was someone he trusted, he was not the kind of man who would deny an employee the chance to bury her mother. Yet the question remained of who would take Margaret's place caring for Sophie and, more importantly, preparing the little girl's medication. Dr. Lawson was summoned to instruct the nurse on how to mix the doses, and left strict directions, emphasizing exact timing and measurement. But by the next day, Sophie's regular nurse abruptly requested leave for a family emergency, and her replacement was involved in a car accident on the way to the mansion, as though fate itself were arranging the pieces, and Olivia seized the moment. volunteering to watch over Sophie during the staffing shortage, telling Elena she adored the child and wanted to help. And Elena, who had always held affection for Olivia, suggested it to Dominic, who agreed after witnessing the way Sophie clung to the young maid. On the first night, when it was time for Sophie's medicine, Olivia held the cup of water and the pills in her hands, and looked at the little girl sitting on the bed waiting, mouth already open out of long ingrained habit. Yet Olivia did not give her the pills. She slipped them into her pocket, handed Sophie the plain water, and told her she did not need her medicine tonight. And Sophie did not protest because she did not know what the medicine was for, only that she was told to take it every day, and if Miss Olivia said she did not need it, then she did not. That night Sophie slept restlessly, tossing and whimpering, and Olivia sat beside her bed worrying whether she had done the right thing, knowing that stopping medication abruptly could be dangerous, but also knowing those pills were poisoning the child day after day, choosing to trust her instincts. On the first day without medication, Sophie woke with different eyes, no longer dull and vacant, gazing around the room with a curiosity Olivia had never seen, asking more questions, smiling more, eating more, changes that nearly moved Olivia to tears. By the second day, the transformation deepened. Sophie reached more accurately for objects, walked through the room with more confidence, bumping into fewer things, and her eyes, once empty as two dark wells, began to hold light, following a butterfly that drifted past the window, something no blind child could do. By the third day, a miracle unfolded as Olivia sat on the bed beside her, telling a fairy tale about a princess and a prince, while Sophie listened, not staring into the void as she always had, but looking at Olivia's face, truly looking, and then raising her hand to touch Olivia's hair, letting her tiny fingers sift through the brown strands with fascination, before asking in a bell-clear voice, "Miss Olivia, what color is your hair?" Olivia froze, heart clenched tight, forcing herself to swallow and answer steadily that her hair was brown, and Sophie tilted her head, thinking, then pointed at Olivia's eyes and asked, "And your eyes?" Olivia whispered that they were brown too, and Sophie smiled, the brightest smile Olivia had ever seen on her small face, and she said with breathless excitement, "I see it, I see your hair, I see your eyes, Miss Olivia, I can see." And Olivia gathered her into her arms and cried, silent tears falling into the little girl's dark hair, while Sophie, not understanding why Miss Olivia was crying, simply hugged her back and patted her the way Olivia had comforted her each night. 4 years, Sophie had been imprisoned in manufactured darkness. 4 years living as a blind child, though her eyes had been perfectly normal. 4 years of Dominic's grief, as he believed his daughter would never see light, all because someone wanted this suffering. And Olivia wiped her tears, looking into those slowly brightening eyes, knowing she could not wait another moment, that she had to tell Dominic the truth even if he might not believe her, even if he might think she had lost her mind, even if he might kill her for accusing Dr. Lawson, the man he had trusted for 15 years. But she had to try. For Sophie, for the little girl who had just seen the real world for the very first time. Olivia's joy did not last long, for on the afternoon of the third day, while she was teaching Sophie to recognize colors through the flowers in the garden, a sleek black car pulled up to the gates of the estate, and Dr. Richard Lawson stepped out, his face tense, his stride urgent as though summoned for an emergency, and the moment Olivia saw him through the window her blood seemed to turn to ice, knowing Margaret must have called him or someone in the mansion had noticed Sophie's sudden changes and alerted him, and whatever the reason, his presence was not for a routine checkup, but because he suspected something was wrong. Olivia hurried Sophie back to her room, told her to lie down and close her eyes, begged her not to tell anyone she could see, not to follow any movement, not to appear different, and Sophie obeyed without understanding, simply because she trusted Miss Olivia. Yet it was too late. Dr. Lawson entered only minutes later without knocking, without asking permission, and Olivia stood beside the bed fighting to keep her face still while her heart pounded hard enough she feared he could hear it. He looked at Sophie, then at Olivia, his gaze behind the gold-rimmed glasses sharp as a blade, saying nothing as he walked to the bed and began his examination. He shone a light into Sophie's eyes, and her pupils constricted, a reflex no child born blind could ever exhibit, a reflex that exposed everything. For an instant, before he masked it, his face tightened with shock, and then he straightened, turning to Olivia with a voice cold as stone. "Has she been taking her medication?" Olivia swallowed, knowing a lie would be obvious, but the truth might destroy her, and so she said nothing, lowering her head like a foolish servant who did not understand the question, but he did not need her answer, he knew. He opened his black leather case, withdrawing a syringe and a vial of clear liquid, his hands swift and practiced, the movements of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Olivia wanted to stop him, wanted to scream, but she dared not. She was only a maid, and he was the personal physician Dominic trusted implicitly, and if she caused a scene, she would be removed long before she could reveal the truth, or worse, she would vanish like the maids Elena whispered about. The needle pierced Sophie's tiny arm, and the little girl screamed in pain as Dr. Lawson held her still and pushed the entire dose into her body, and within seconds her voice faded, her newly bright eyes dulled, her limbs went slack like a rag doll, and she slipped into a drugged haze, breathing slow and shallow. Olivia stood frozen, her nails digging into her palms until they bled, yet she felt nothing but the crushing sight of the child who had just seen the world for the first time being dragged back into manufactured darkness. Dr. Lawson packed his instruments and called Dominic, his voice dripping with expertly crafted worry, making Olivia want to retch as he reported, "Mr. Valentino, Sophie has just suffered a dangerous neurological episode. I had to administer an emergency sedative to prevent a seizure. This occurred because her medication has not been given properly these past several days. If this continues, these episodes could cause permanent brain damage or even death." Olivia heard Dominic's roar of anger through the phone, heard his panic, heard him promise to come home at once as Dr. Lawson reassured him that Sophie was stable and recommended increasing her medication to prevent further episodes. A lie, every word of it, from beginning to end. When he hung up, Dr. Lawson turned to Olivia, no longer pretending warmth, his eyes filled with cold threat. "What is your duty?" he asked softly, each word edged like a knife. "To give Sophie her medicine on schedule." "You failed. Why?" Olivia bowed her head, her voice trembling, offering the smallest, safest lie she could manage, saying she thought perhaps the little girl did not need so many pills and she had not understood. Dr. Lawson studied her for several long seconds, weighing whether she was merely an incompetent servant or a genuine danger, and then dismissed her with an icy order. "You are not to go near Sophie again. I will inform Mr. Valentino of your negligence." He left the room, and Olivia remained beside the bed staring at Sophie's limp form, tears sliding down her cheeks unchecked as she realized she had failed, that the little girl had been dragged back to hell once more, but she also knew she could not stop now. Tonight, she told herself. She would tell Dominic tonight, even if it cost her life. Dominic returned to the mansion in a storm of fury, striding straight to Sophie's room without looking at anyone, his black eyes burning as though fire smoldered behind them. And though Dr. Lawson had already left after prescribing an increased dosage and promising to return in the morning, Dominic sat beside his daughter's bed, holding her small hand in his own, staring at her motionless body, her pale skin, her faint breath, and the memory of losing Vanessa crashed through him, for he could not survive losing Sophie as well. Olivia stood outside the door watching through the narrow gap, seeing the broad lines of his back trembling, hearing the broken tenderness in his voice as he whispered to Sophie, and she knew this was the moment, if not now, then never. She pushed open the door. Dominic turned, his eyes red with anger and fear, and the instant he saw her, the rage erupted. He shot to his feet and advanced on her with steps so heavy they seemed capable of crushing the floor, roaring, "You dare come here? Doctor Lawson says you neglected her medication. Do you understand what you nearly caused?" Yet Olivia did not retreat. She stood her ground even as his face loomed inches from hers, even as she felt the heat of his breath and saw the veins rising at his temples. For she had survived the orphanage, survived Derek, survived the night she stood on the Brooklyn Bridge staring into the abyss, and fear of death no longer held her. "Sophie is not blind, Mr. Valentino." The words froze him. He stared at her as though she had spoken a language he had never heard. "What? What did you just say?" Olivia pulled her phone from her pocket, opened the photographs she had taken, and showed him the images one by one, the medication labels, the original medical report speaking with a steady voice, though her heart thundered. "These are the drugs Sophie takes each day. Not vitamins, not supplements, but extremely potent sedatives intended for severely ill adult psychiatric patients. And at these doses they keep a 4-year-old child in a constant fog, unable to respond normally to light or her surroundings." She slid to the next photo. "And this is Sophie's newborn eye exam from New York Presbyterian, performed by Dr. Amanda Chen, clearly stating her vision was normal with no abnormalities. Sophie was not born blind." Dominic snatched the phone from her hand, reading each line, his expression shifting from rage to confusion to something darker and more unbearable. and when he looked up, his eyes held the force of a gathering storm. "You fabricated all of this. Dr. Lawson has been with my family for 15 years, he delivered Sophie. He was the one who explained her blindness. Why would he do this? I do not know why, Olivia answered, but I know what I saw. 3 days without medication and Sophie became alert. She followed movement. She reacted to sunlight. She asked me what color my hair was. She looked at me, Mr. Valentino. She saw me for the first time in 4 years, until Dr. Lawson came and injected her back into darkness." Dominic staggered a step backward, looking down at Sophie's still body, then at Olivia, then at the phone, his voice shaking with something she could not name when he asked, "You are saying, Dr. Lawson has been poisoning my daughter for 4 years? "I am saying you should see for yourself," Olivia replied, her voice firm. "If I am wrong, you may kill me, I have nothing left to lose. But if I am right, you will lose your daughter forever to a darkness someone else created. Will you risk that?" Dominic stared at her, his gaze drilling into her soul, and he could have killed her in that moment with his bare hands and no one would dare protest. But he did not. "What do you want me to do?" he asked at last, his voice rough. Olivia exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath. 3 days. Do not give Sophie any medication for 3 days. Watch her yourself, observe her with your own eyes, and you will see the truth. Dominic was silent for a long time before he gave a single short nod, but that was all she needed. He believed her, or at least believed enough to let her prove it. The next 3 days would decide everything. Dominic did not sleep for the next 3 nights, ordering Sophie's room sealed off so that no one but he and Olivia could enter, keeping vigil at his daughter's bedside and watching for the smallest change. While Dr. Lawson called again and again, demanding to examine Sophie and warning of the dangers if she did not receive her medication, all of which Dominic refused with a calm voice that did not match the eyes, betraying a man waiting, hoping, fearing a truth too impossible to believe. On the first day, Sophie was still under the lingering effects of the injection, sleeping heavily, waking only in brief, hazy intervals before drifting back into unconsciousness, and Dominic sat without moving, holding her tiny hand and wondering whether he was foolish to hope for a miracle. On the second day, Sophie began to stir more, sitting up, looking around the room with a curiosity he had not seen in 4 years, her eyes no longer vacant but shifting, tracking, trying to understand the world around her. He lifted a small stuffed bear and moved it from side to side, watching in stunned silence as her gaze followed it, doing it again and again, each time seeing the same impossible result. His daughter was tracking the bear with her eyes. On the third day, the miracle revealed itself fully when Sophie woke, sat up, and looked directly into her father's face, not with the unfocused stare he had lived with for years, but with true attention, true recognition, and Dominic remained frozen, afraid even to breathe, watching her tilt her head, studying him, before lifting her tiny hand to touch his cheek, tracing the lines of his face, the bridge of his nose, the thick shape of his eyebrows, and then she smiled, the brightest smile he had ever seen, and said in a bell-clear voice, "Daddy, you are so beautiful." Those 3 words shattered every wall he had built in 20 years, and the most ruthless Mafia kingpin on the East Coast wept like a child, gathering Sophie into his arms as tears poured unchecked, his shoulders shaking as he cried for joy at being seen by his daughter for the first time, for grief at the 4 stolen years, and for the fury rising in his blood demanding retribution. Olivia stood in the corner, wiping her own tears, feeling something inside her mend as she watched father and daughter cling to each other, knowing she had done the right thing no matter what came next. That night, hell descended upon those who had betrayed Dominic Valentino. Dr. Lawson was seized from his home at midnight by men whose faces were carved from ice. Margaret, returning from her mother's funeral, was intercepted at the gates and taken straight to the basement. The interrogation room beneath the Valentino estate was a place no one wished to see, with soundproof walls, concrete floors that washed clean, and all the tools necessary to unravel a human soul. Dr. Lawson required none. For the moment he saw Dominic's eyes, he confessed everything. That Victor Castellano had contacted him shortly after Vanessa became pregnant. That Victor, the man who had murdered Dominic's father 3 decades earlier, was still hiding in Chicago and nurturing a plan for revenge, unable to attack Dominic directly but capable of striking at his weakness, his child. The plan was simple and monstrous. Cripple Sophie, to break Dominic, to dull him, to make him careless, to create openings Victor could exploit before claiming the empire he had once tried to steal from Dominic's father. Dr. Lawson had been paid $2 million to execute the scheme, falsifying Sophie's eye exam, declaring her blind at birth, and prescribing heavy sedatives for 4 years to maintain the illusion. Margaret was bribed with $500,000 to oversee the daily dosing. Both knew exactly what they were doing. Neither cared about the innocent child. Dominic listened without expression, without shouting, without breaking anything. He simply stood, walked to the door, and said to Marcus, his most loyal guard, "Make it slow, make it hurt, and when it is done, leave nothing behind." Dr. Lawson and Margaret vanished from the earth that night. No bodies were found, no questions were asked. 3 days later, Dominic traveled to Chicago alone, carrying only his father's gun and 30 years of hatred, and what remained of Victor Castellano was discovered in his mansion the next morning, though the police never found a suspect, and no one was surprised and no one dared to look deeper. The debt of 30 years had finally been paid in blood. After the storm came a fragile and hard-won peace, with leading specialists from Johns Hopkins arriving at the Valentino estate to guide Sophie through detox and recovery, not the kind of corrupt men like Dr. Lawson but professionals. Dominic had vetted down to 3 generations and paid 10 times their usual salary to secure absolute loyalty, and Sophie's healing unfolded slowly, yet miraculously, as the first week brought lingering headaches while her body purged the drugs. The second week revealed clearer recognition of colors and shapes. The third allowed her to read the large letters in picture books, and by the end of 2 months she was a completely normal 4-year-old girl, mischievous, curious, endlessly asking questions about everything she saw. The first time she looked at the sky, she stood in the garden for nearly an hour, face tilted upward, mouth parted in awe, and the first time she saw a blooming rose, she cried because she had not known the world could be so beautiful. And when she finally saw the wedding photograph of her parents, she held it to her chest and whispered that her mother was so beautiful and she wished she could meet her, while behind her Dominic stood silently, with tears rolling down his face that he made no effort to hide. Meanwhile, Lily, Olivia's sister, had been transferred to Memorial Sloan Kettering, one of the foremost cancer centers in America, with Dominic paying every expense from chemotherapy to the bone marrow transplant, to the medications and aftercare, not calling it repayment or gratitude but simply saying that Olivia had saved his daughter and he would do everything possible to save hers. And after 6 months of treatment, Lily was declared cancer-free. A 22-year-old girl once told she had only months left, now standing victorious over death itself. And when Olivia held her in the hospital, they wept together like children, 2 sisters who had lost their parents, survived earthly hell, and somehow still had each other, now with a future that finally felt real. 1 year after the terror that nearly destroyed them all, the Valentino estate echoed with laughter as 5-year-old Sophie raced through the garden with her dark hair flying and her bright eyes like polished gems, clinging to Olivia, her beloved Miss Liv, begging for stories and songs and drawing lessons. While Lily now lived in a Manhattan apartment Dominic purchased for her, attending college and building a life she had once believed impossible. And Olivia, the girl who once stood on the Brooklyn Bridge, ready to surrender to the void, had become the most essential person in the estate after Sophie herself. On an autumn evening when golden leaves drifted across the garden and the sunset burned deep red across the sky, Dominic led Olivia to the stone bench, where he had once found her crying alone in the rain, and he knelt before her with a small black velvet box in his hand, and Olivia covered her mouth with trembling fingers as tears blurred her vision, while he spoke in a low, unsteady voice telling her she had given him back his daughter, given him back the light he had believed forever lost, shown him that even in a world as dark as his there were still souls brave and pure enough to guide others home. And he said he wanted one more gift from her, asking her to give him her life, to stay beside him and Sophie, to let him love her the way she had deserved to be loved her entire life. And she nodded, unable to speak through her tears, while he slid the diamond ring onto her finger and drew her into his arms. From the second-floor window, Sophie watched with a radiant smile, turning to Elena and announcing with utter happiness that Miss Liv would be her new mother because she saw her father put the ring on her finger, and so the story ended not in the tragedy it once seemed destined for, but in light, in love, in the quiet miracle of truth finally brought into the open, as the orphaned girl once pushed to the edge of the Brooklyn Bridge found a home in the mansion of a Mafia king. The child imprisoned in manufactured darkness for 4 years finally saw the world, and the man who believed he had lost everything discovered the one thing powerful enough to illuminate his entire life. The tale reminds us that light exists even in the deepest shadows, that truth will always rise no matter how long it has been buried, that the courage of an ordinary person can reshape an empire, and that love, no matter where it is born or what storms it must endure, remains the greatest force in this world. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you will not miss the next moving story, and a like and share from you will help this tale reach more people. I would love to hear what you felt about the journey of Olivia, Sophie, and Dominic, and whether you have ever faced moments that seemed hopeless until an unexpected light appeared. So please share your thoughts in the comments so I can listen to the truths within your heart. I wish everyone watching this video good health, a life filled with joy, and peaceful days ahead. Thank you for staying with me until the very end, and I look forward to seeing you in the next story.